In the world of psychopaths, the Sybil system dictates everything. Crime is preemptively judged before it happens, free will is suppressed, and an AI governs society's fate. But in this world of manufactured peace, one man dared to challenge the system, a man who saw through its lies and sought to dismantle it at any cost. Shogo Makishima isn't just any antagonist. He is a philosopher, a revolutionary, and perhaps the most terrifying kind of villain, one that may have been right all along. The world of psychopaths presents an eerily logical conclusion to humanity's obsession with control. Crime, disorder, and unpredictability have been erased, not through social reform or human progress, but through an omnipotent surveillance state that preemptively judges people based on their mental state. The Sybil system is the ultimate authority, a flawless AI-driven government that determines not only guilt, but also potential guilt. If your mind registers even the slightest inclination toward criminal behavior, you're flagged, arrested, or, in extreme cases, executed on the spot. This isn't some dystopian dictatorship where rebels fight in the streets. There's no visible oppression. No one is suffering in the traditional sense. In fact, most people are content. They work their jobs, live their lives, and obey the system without question. Why? Because they don't even realize they're in a prison of the mind, and that's the horror of the Sybil system. It doesn't need to enforce laws through violence because it has already conditioned society to obey. It has removed the very idea of rebellion. If people cannot even think of breaking the rules, then they will never break them. To many, this world might seem like a utopia. No war, no serial killers, no corruption, just a perfectly functioning machine where everyone has their assigned place. But there's a cost, a devastating cost, because in this so-called utopia, there is no free will. Shogo Makishima is one of the only people who sees the true horror of this world. And what makes him dangerous isn't just his intellect or ruthlessness, it's the fact that he's immune to Sybil's control. For reasons unknown, Makishima's crime coefficient never rises no matter what he does. The system cannot judge him, cannot label him, and most importantly, cannot control him. This makes him a ghost in the machine, an anomaly that threatens to expose the fundamental flaw in Sybil's design. And that flaw is this: a world without crime is a world without true choice. Makishima doesn't just oppose Sybil because he wants chaos. His philosophy runs deeper than that. He believes that true humanity only exists when people have the ability to struggle, to fail, to make mistakes, and to grow from them. Under Sybil, that's impossible. The moment someone starts thinking in a way the system deems dangerous, their fate is sealed. They are removed before they can ever challenge the status quo. Makishima doesn't just hate Sybil, he despises the complacency it has created in people. He sees an entire society that has given up its right to think, and to him, that's the greatest tragedy of all. Many villains in anime oppose oppressive systems because they were victims of them. They suffered under cruel governments, lost loved ones to tyranny, or were personally betrayed. But Makishima was never oppressed by Sybil. He had the intelligence, charisma, and freedom to live comfortably within the system, unnoticed and unbothered. If he had simply played along, he could have manipulated his way into a position of immense power. But he didn't. Because for Makishima, it wasn't about his freedom. It was about the principle of freedom itself. To him, a life where people cannot choose their own paths, even if those paths lead to failure, pain, or destruction, is not a life worth living. He understands that struggle, ambition, and even rebellion are essential to human progress. If no one can fail, then no one can truly succeed. If no one can take risks, then no one can create anything new. This is why he orchestrates tragedies, pushes people to their limits, and forces them into desperate situations. He wants to see if, when stripped of their safety nets, humans will finally wake up. Because to Makishima, a world without true choice is just as bad as death. In his eyes, humans are meant to struggle. They are meant to face hardship, to question authority, to think freely. A world without those things isn't a utopia. It's a graveyard. This is why Makishima orchestrates chaos. He wants to see if people, when pushed to their limits, can break free from their chains. Because in a world without struggle, what does it mean to be human? Unlike most villains, Makishima doesn't rely on brute force or political strategy. His weapon of choice? Ideas. And where does he find these ideas? Classic literature and philosophy. Makishima isn't just well-read, his entire worldview is built on the writings of history's greatest thinkers. Some of his biggest influences include George Orwell's 1984, A Totalitarian World Where Thought Itself is Controlled, Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The Question of What Makes Someone Truly Human, Shakespeare's Macbeth, The Struggle Between Fate and Free Will. Makishima isn't just quoting these books for aesthetic reasons, he is using them as a blueprint for his ideology. From Orwell, he takes the belief that true oppression isn't physical, it's mental. From Philip K. Dick, he embraces the idea that true humanity comes from defying the system. And from Shakespeare, he understands that men are meant to fight their own destiny, not accept it. This is what makes Makishima terrifyingly unique. He isn't just a villain with a cause, he is a philosopher with a mission. One of the most chilling aspects of Makishima is that, in many ways, he's not wrong. Think about the greatest moments in human history: scientific discoveries, artistic revolutions, groundbreaking philosophies. None of them happened in times of comfort and control. They happened because people rebelled against the status quo. Galileo challenged the Catholic Church to prove that the earth orbits the sun. The French Revolution tore down a corrupt monarchy to establish democracy. The internet itself was built by hackers and programmers who believed information should be free. All progress is born from conflict. And yet, in the world of psychopaths, conflict has been removed. Everything is controlled, predicted, and sanitized. There is no pain, but there is also no innovation, no discovery, no ambition. To Makishima, this is worse than death. Because if people are incapable of thinking for themselves, of making mistakes, of choosing their own path, then they are no longer human. And if humanity has lost what makes it human, then why should it continue to exist? Sounds extreme, right? But think about it. How many times have you heard someone say, "I don't care about politics. I just do what I'm told," or "It's not my problem"? That's exactly what Makishima was fighting against. Unlike a traditional villain who seeks to overthrow the system directly, Makishima takes a different approach. Instead of fighting Sybil itself, he fights the people who obey it. He doesn't bomb government buildings. He doesn't lead an army. Instead, he conducts experiments. He manipulates Rikako Oryo, the artistically inclined serial killer, to see if she can create true art under oppression. He encourages the helmet riots, unleashing hidden aggression in citizens to see if they will embrace their darkest desires. He pushes Toyohisa Senguji, the elite hunter, to prove that the desire to kill is still a fundamental part of human nature. Makishima doesn't force anyone to commit crimes. He simply removes the barriers preventing them from doing so. And what does he find? The moment Sibyl's control is weakened, people start acting on their suppressed desires. Because in the end, no matter how much you try to regulate human nature, it cannot be erased. This is Makishima's ultimate message. People are only good under Sybil because they fear the consequences, but take away the system's control, and the illusion of peace falls apart instantly. To Makishima, that is proof enough that the system is a lie. Makishima's philosophy is compelling, but it comes with a brutal contradiction. If free will is the ultimate good, does that mean violence, destruction, and suffering are necessary evils? Makishima isn't just fighting for the right to think, he is fighting for the right to destroy. To him, Sibyl's oppression justifies extreme rebellion, and that means he is willing to sacrifice countless lives to prove his point. This is where his ideology collapses, because while Makishima's diagnosis of the problem is correct, his solution is horrifying. A world where choice exists is a world where people will sometimes choose evil. But does that mean a world where choice is removed is the better option? That's the ultimate question Makishima forces us to ask. And the fact that there is no easy answer is exactly what makes him such a terrifyingly brilliant character. At its core, Makishima's philosophy isn't about destruction, it's about awakening. He wants people to open their eyes, to see the system for what it is, and to question everything, because to him, blind obedience is the greatest crime of all. And whether we agree with him or not, isn't that a lesson worth remembering? It's easy to admire Makishima. He's eloquent, intelligent, and driven by a philosophy that, at its core, makes sense. He sees a world that has traded free will for security and dares to ask the question, is this really the best we can do? But admiration only lasts until you take a closer look, until you examine his actions and the cost of his ideals. Because for all his brilliance, for all his poetic speeches about individuality, there is one inescapable truth about Shogo Makishima. He is a monster, not in the traditional sense. He isn't a raging beast like the criminals he manipulates. He isn't an impulsive villain who kills for the thrill of it. Makishima's monstrosity is cold, calculated, and disturbingly rational, and that's what makes him terrifying. The core of Makishima's philosophy is freedom. He despises the Sybil system because it robs people of choice, ambition, and the right to define their own lives. But here's the problem. Makishima doesn't actually give people freedom. Instead of letting them wake up naturally, he forces them into life or death situations, deliberately stripping them of their agency. He doesn't guide people to self-discovery. He pushes them into suffering, whether they want it or not. If Sibyl's crime is controlling people through fear, then Makishima's crime is forcing people to act against their will, and that makes him no better than the system he hates. Makishima's philosophy is all about free will, but in practice, he plays puppet master, deciding who will suffer, who will break, and who will be saved by his ideology. That's not freedom, that's tyranny in a different form. Imagine someone telling you, I just want you to be free, and then immediately shoving you off a cliff. That's basically Makishima's version of liberation. One of Makishima's most iconic moments happens in a wheat field. It's a quiet, dreamlike sequence where he talks about his view on society. He compares humans to wheat, growing predictably, swaying in the wind, living only to be harvested. To him, society is nothing more than a field of crops, controlled, manipulated, and eventually consumed. And here's where we see the true depth of his detachment. Makishima doesn't see people as individuals. He sees them as concepts, as test subjects in his grand philosophical game. He doesn't hate the people who obey Sybil, he just doesn't care about them. To him, their deaths, their suffering, their lives, none of it truly matters. He only values the few who can break free. The rest are just background noise. This is what makes Makishima different from other villains. He isn't just fighting a corrupt system. He isn't just challenging authority. He is playing God. For most of the series, Makishima is emotionally untouchable. He speaks in riddles, rarely raises his voice, and never loses his composure. But there are moments, tiny cracks in the facade, where we see the human beneath the ideology. When Toyohisa Senguji, the cyborg hunter, is killed, Makishima looks genuinely disappointed. Not in a sad way, but in the way a scientist might look at a failed experiment. It's a glimpse into how he truly sees people, as pawns in his intellectual game. This is where we see the real Makishima. As Kogami holds a gun to his head, Makishima doesn't beg for his life. He doesn't run. He doesn't even seem afraid. Instead, he smiles. Why? Because in his mind, he has already won. Kogami, a man who once followed the rules, has broken free, even if it means committing murder. Imagine standing at the edge of death and thinking, yeah, this is exactly how I wanted it to go. That's Makishima. Makishima's final moments tell us everything we need to know about him. He was never fighting to survive. He was never trying to win. He just wanted to prove a point, and in his last breath, he believes he did. So where does that leave us? Makishima saw the problem in society clearly. He understood the dangers of totalitarian control, the death of free will, and the consequences of blind obedience. But his solution was just as horrifying as the system he opposed. Sybil removes free will by controlling people before they commit crimes. Makishima removes free will by forcing people into situations where they have no choice but to fight or die. They are opposites, but they are also mirror images of each other. And that's what makes Makishima so fascinating. Because in the end, he wasn't just fighting against Sybil, he was proving that the very thing Sybil was trying to erase, the raw, chaotic, uncontrollable nature of humanity, can never truly be destroyed, even if it costs countless lives. Throughout Psychopaths, Makishima doesn't just fight against the Sybil system, he fights against human nature itself. He wants to see if people can break free from the system's conditioning. He wants to prove that, deep down, humanity is still capable of independent thought and action. But for all his manipulations, for all his philosophical experiments, there's only one person who ever truly challenged him, Shinya Kogami. And in their final confrontation, we don't just see a battle of strength, we see a battle of ideology. Because while Kogami and Makishima might stand on opposite sides, they are more alike than either of them would ever admit. Their final battle is not just a fight, it's a clash of two different worldviews. Makishima stands for absolute freedom, no matter the cost. Kogami stands for justice, even in a broken system. When they finally face off, there are no dominators, no crime coefficients, no laws, just two men, two ideologies, and one final decision. In this moment, Kogami is faced with the ultimate dilemma. If he kills Makishima, he proves Makishima's entire philosophy right. He proves that true justice cannot exist within Sybyl's rules. If he spares him, Makishima escapes, continues his revolution, and the cycle of violence never ends. There is no right answer. And yet, in that quiet, frozen moment, Kogami pulls the trigger. Makishima does not beg. He does not fight back. He does not look afraid. Instead, he smiles. Why? Because in that moment, he has won. Not in the traditional sense. His revolution has failed. His plans have collapsed. His body is dying. But Kogami, the man who once believed in the system, has now become its greatest traitor. By killing him, Kogami proves that justice cannot exist in a world ruled by Sybil. He proves that Makishima was right all along. And that's all Makishima ever wanted. A world where people are willing to make their own choices, even if those choices lead to bloodshed. His death is not a failure. It is a confirmation. And so, in his final moments, he is at peace. Bro went out like a philosopher samurai, smiling, bleeding, and knowing he had already won the debate before the fight even started. For Kogami, this is the end of the line. By executing Makishima, he has stepped beyond the law. He has proven that the only real justice is personal justice. And Sybil? Sybil doesn't punish him, it lets him go. Because now, he is exactly what Makishima predicted, a man who has abandoned the illusion of law and taken fate into his own hands. He cannot return to the bureau. He cannot pretend to believe in Sybil's justice. So, he does the only thing he can do. He disappears. A wanderer, a ghost, a man who has looked directly into the abyss and knows that it has already changed him forever. Makishima was a murderer, a manipulator, and a monster. But he was also a visionary, a philosopher, and in many ways, a necessary evil. Kogami was a protector, a thinker, and a believer in justice. But in the end, he became everything Makishima wanted him to be. So, who won? Did Makishima win by proving that true justice cannot exist in a controlled society? Or did Kogami win by stopping a man who was willing to destroy countless lives for his ideology? Maybe there is no answer. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Because if even the greatest enforcer in the system couldn't find justice, then maybe justice never existed to begin with. That's where Shinya Kogami comes in. He isn't a philosopher. He isn't a radical. He isn't interested in destroying the system just to prove a point. Kogami wants something Makishima never cared about, justice. But here's the tragedy. By the end of the series, Kogami no longer believes in justice. By killing Makishima, he confirms that in a world ruled by Sybil, the only real justice is personal justice. And once he accepts that, he can no longer be part of the system. Sybil doesn't punish him. Sybil doesn't execute him. It lets him go. Because it knows what Makishima knew all along. Kogami has become something else entirely. Neither a protector nor a villain. Just another man trying to survive in a world where the line between right and wrong no longer exists. So, was Makishima right? Yes and no. Yes, because he correctly identified the dangers of an all-controlling system. Yes, because he saw that people had become passive, willing to let machines make every decision for them. Yes, because he knew that true freedom comes with risk, uncertainty, and the ability to fail. But also, no, because his solution was just as monstrous as the problem he was fighting. No, because he forced people into suffering rather than giving them a choice to fight for themselves. No, because he didn't believe in fixing the world, he just wanted to watch it burn. Makishima was not a hero, but he also wasn't just a villain. He was a mirror, reflecting the flaws of both Sybil and humanity itself. And that's what makes him so unforgettable. Makishima is dead. Sybil remains. Kogami has vanished into exile. But the debate Makishima started, it never ends. Even today, we are constantly faced with the same choice. Do we trade freedom for safety? Do we sacrifice individuality for order? And if the world ever reaches a point where every thought, every action, every aspect of our lives is controlled by machines, algorithms, and unseen systems, will we fight back? Or will we smile, accept our fate, and never question it again? Because if Makishima was right about one thing, It's that the greatest crime of all is not thinking for yourself.